This is Ben Borg.
This is Katrina Borg.
This is Claire Green.
This is Maggie Morgan. And this is the More Than Macros podcast.
This episode of the More Than Macros podcast is brought to you by Married to My Macros, performance nutrition coaching. Married to My Macros is a personalized one-on-one nutrition coaching service providing the highest level of support to clients with the practical tools and accountability needed to improve health, physical performance, and body composition through diet. While this podcast will fuel your mind, let the team at Married to My Macros fuel your body.
Welcome back to the More Than Macros podcast. We are on episode 10 of Ben and Kat's IVF journey. So last week we sat down and talked to the both of them just about their labor experience and kind of a little bit about the past couple of weeks. But then we wanted to sit down with Kat and get to know a little bit more about what her experience has been these past couple of weeks, touch on nutrition and everything related to that. So really excited to kind of dig into this. So how have you been feeling?
Yeah, good. It's definitely been a big few weeks. Give me one sec. Sorry, husband baby noises in the background. So yeah, it's been a big week of changes. No, I think if you talk to any new mom or new parent at this stage, so Mattea is 2 weeks tomorrow. It's how are you feeling is like different every day and is different from like the morning to the afternoon. Like she's cluster feeding right now. She's probably just about to do growth spurt or in the middle of one. And so she's tended to cluster feed in the evenings and then kind of like from like 9 to 3 in the morning.
What does cluster feed mean?
It's when they feed like every hour or multiple times every hour, typically shorter feeds, but they're just basically like as soon as they come off the breast, they're ready to go back on. And it is thought to be a mechanism to actually drive up mom's milk supply in anticipation of a growth spurt. It happens quite frequently in the beginning, but it is draining. It's physically and emotionally exhausting. And then you kind of get to a point where like last night I was like, oh, like my boobs, like they feel like they're empty. And so then I'm worried that she's sucking and expending all of this energy trying to feed, but not really getting all that much in terms of nutrition. So, because they say that breasts are like rivers, like they're never completely empty. They're not like buckets, but she, if she's at it a lot, she might be getting a little bit less. And then, when she actually does go down and gets like a 3-hour stretch after that, I wake up and I'm just like, oh. But yeah, so like last night she started cluster feeding earlier in the day. So like from 4 to 9, she fed every 20 to 30 minutes. And by 9, I was just feeling exhausted, emotionally exhausted, cold, just because your body's working very hard. So your energy expenditure is up. And Ben was like, oh, why don't you go take a shower and I'll just sit with her for a bit. And she actually fell asleep on him for a few hours. And I got like a shower and 2 hours of sleep and feel like a completely different person now. And then she did quite well overnight. So I think the very long-winded answer to it is, yeah, it's totally different every day and at different times of the day, but generally we're doing quite well.
How has she been sleeping?
Different every day. So I think like I can see progress as we go. When we first brought her home for the first few days, she wouldn't sleep in a bassinet. She would only sleep if she was on one of us. And so obviously that's really difficult because it means one of us has to be up at all times because you don't want to be passing out and like rolling on top of her in bed or anything like that. And when you're so sleep deprived and you're like, ugh, it's tough. But we've managed to get her settled in the bassinet. So while she might have, a period every day where she's crying and won't settle in the bassinet, usually like when we first try and go to sleep, she's generally pretty good for it. And we're starting to see stretches of 2 and 3 hour sleeps at a time, which is awesome. Although 2 days ago, I think she had like sort of basically I had to wake her for feeds every 4 hours. Like she just was like basically sleeping through. So then of course I panicked that the baby was broken and like called the nurse's line. So yeah, it's different every day, and you know, I've been told not to expect any sort of pattern or routine for at least 4 weeks, and so to kind of just like lean into the discomfort of that, which is
Right.
really fun, because I'll start seeing clients again tomorrow, which I'm actually so excited for, because I feel like it's been so long since I chatted to my people, but I'm terrified because I have no idea how she sleeps every night.
Right. Yeah, and how to plan your day around that, I guess it's going to be quite tricky, hey?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've done pretty well in that, you know, there's always one person around to look after her. That being said, you know, like if she needs to feed, she needs to feed. But again, I have like the most wonderful clients in the world, and
I was going to say, they probably won't mind.
There's no one who's going to be like totally bothered by me being like, I have to feed her while we're on a call, you know?
Yeah. No, yeah, they're going to be happy to just catch up with you.
Yeah, exactly.
So
they're like, how do I book in with Mattea, not you?
Yeah. So we've kind of got a little bit of an understanding of Mattea's eating schedule, but what has your nutrition looked like these days?
About as all over the map as hers.
I ask as we hop on this call and she's eating breakfast at 1 p.m.
Yeah, so it has been, and you know, having worked with a lot of women in the immediate postpartum period, we've really emphasized those first few weeks just about doing what you can and not being hard on yourself and not holding yourself to kind of your level of expectation that you would pre-pregnancy, because you're exhausted, you're learning someone else's schedule, you're figuring out your schedule, your appetite's all over the map. There's so many things going on, and I would really discourage anyone from, you know, attempting to track or log or something like that in the first few weeks. So it's simply responding to your own body's cues. Mine, I actually been quite surprised. I really expected this massive increase in appetite with breastfeeding, especially with the amount of cluster feeding she's been doing. And I haven't really noticed a huge increase in appetite, but I'm also very much going for calorie dense foods. So like lower volume, high cal density foods that are easy to eat, because you get very few opportunities. Like half the time I'm sitting, Ben made me French toast yesterday for breakfast, and I'm sitting there eating French toast as I'm feeding her. And I was like, oh, poor thing. Like, you're going to end up wearing half of this. I actually did really well. It's super
would have liked to have that on film.
Yeah.
Is there a concern, you know, if you aren't tracking, is there a concern of under eating while breastfeeding?
Definitely, because your actual caloric requirements increase more when you're breastfeeding than they do when you're pregnant. So definitely you need to be conscious of hitting that. Most women that I've worked with have said that they have quite a profound appetite increase when they initiate breastfeeding. And as a result, they're pretty good at intuitively taking in enough to supply that. So long as you're not restricting yourself in ways like, oh, I normally eat low carb, so I need to maintain. No, like you need carbohydrates, definitely, even more so when you're breastfeeding than when you're pregnant or at baseline. You know, protein, not necessarily that so many people have an aversion to it, as it's one of the more kind of like complicated foods to eat, right? It's a lot harder to sit down and cut up a chicken breast and eat that when you're juggling a bunch of things. So you definitely want to make sure that your protein is, you know, for a lot of my clients, I just say, just get 100 grams a day. Make sure you're getting 100 grams a day. And if you've been working with us, you kind of know what that visually looks like. And even if you're throwing in a shake or two to get yourself there. So yes, there's a concern about under eating, but I think for most people, unless you are imposing restrictions on yourself or, you know, overly concerned about getting back to that pre-baby weight really quickly, I think most people will intuitively eat sufficiently in the first few weeks.
Mm-hmm. And are there any foods that you should be avoiding, or that you are avoiding because you know have any aversions or anything like that right now?
Not necessarily. I definitely don't have any aversions at the moment. And you know, there may be certain foods that baby doesn't respond well to, and you'll kind of pick up on that after you've had them a few times, and then, you know, subsequent fussiness after breastfeeding. I know my mom said when when I was breastfeeding. Like she couldn't eat any spicy foods. She couldn't eat anything that she really loved. I haven't found that with Mattea so far. So fingers crossed we stay that way. Things like, you know, honey that you would typically not give a baby because of the spores in them and stuff, are not passed through breast milk. And likewise, those concerns around consuming things like sushi while you're pregnant because of the risk for infection occurring, that's not such a concern, because again, it's not passing through the breast milk. So you don't necessarily have to avoid those foods anymore, which is fantastic. And I would say there's nothing I'm intentionally cutting out. It's more a focus on what I'm intentionally putting in, right? Mm-hmm. So making sure that, I mean, personally, fats are never a problem for me to hit. And Ben's mom has been making these beautiful roasted nuts for us that are just delicious. So like I'm getting tons of good fats out of those. I would say it's protein, and that's not because of the aversion. It's simply because it's a little bit trickier to eat. So Ben's also been making me a lot of like Mexican bowls. Essentially when I went into hospital, I really wanted stuffed peppers. And so he started making me stuffed peppers, and I was like, I actually don't care if they're stuffed peppers. I just want the ingredients. So if you just want to do that as a bowl, and I've literally eaten that basically every day since I gave birth. Which has been great because we're using like a ground turkey, some brown rice, spinach, peppers, and some spices, and a little bit of cheese in there. So the turkey is really quite easy to eat, and it's probably like my primary meat-based protein source right now.
And do you find that it's important, like, I guess, to do meal prep? I feel like it would almost be like if you had a really busy day, like out of the house, you'd want to be just as prepared in terms of meal prep.
Oh, 100%. So again, Ben does most, and by most I mean all of the cooking right now. And so he does big meal prep Sundays, if you've ever seen his stories. So he just does like meal packs. So they've got like a protein and veggies in them, and then there's some carbs that we'll add in, either sweet potatoes or rice or whatever. So having those has been really important, not just for me, but for him, because Ben is just as involved with Mattea as I am, but then he's also picking up a lot of the slack for things that I would normally do around the house. And so for him to have those immediately available meals has been so, so important. And we have a couple other friends who have recently had babies and who are training really, like dads are training really hard in those few weeks after birth. And so the meal prep hasn't just been important for mom, but super important for dad as well. Because you just may not get time to cook, and it sounds so silly to not be able to like fry a couple eggs and throw it on toast or something, but it is very real as you're, you know, when everything's new and it takes you ages to change a diaper or ages to feed, or you're just exhausted and you're healing and recovering. And while it's okay to be going to things like bars or dried fruit or nuts for kind of top up snacks in between, obviously you want to make sure that you are getting like those veggies and those protein sources in, and those are the things that you're not going to hit if you don't have prep done.
Been there. We've all been there one too many times.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's,
you know,
it's totally true, you know, pregnancy, postpartum notwithstanding, but definitely is amplified in that immediate postpartum period. I know for myself and another couple of clients who've like given birth in the last few weeks, I've said for the first week or two, you know, because I've kind of gotten feedback that, I'm not eating as many veggies as normal. I'm like, you know what, veggies are important, and especially in the postpartum period, we want them for their fiber and their nutrients and things like that. But having a week of less veggies than normal is not going to kill you. Let's not over stress about it. Let's just get you through that first week. And once you start to find a little bit of a rhythm and a groove, we can start finding ways to add those back in.
Right. And it does, by the sounds of it, you know, you don't necessarily have the time to be training right now. Is that something that you like plan to get back to? Do you have a timeline for that, or any expectations, I guess?
I do and I don't. So I'm very fortunate in that my husband has done like his birth fit certifications and things like that. So I've got a really great resource in him, which I was kind of like, here, babe, you have lots of pregnant clients. So that worked out really well for me. But I mean, look, we talk about the recovery from birth being a 6-week process. And that 6 weeks is really, that's the amount of time it takes for the uterus to go back to normal following delivery. So certainly by no means are you expected to be recovered within 6 weeks. And obviously recovery is totally individual, and it's going to depend on what the pregnancy was like, what the birth was like, whether it was a vaginal delivery or a C-section, whether there were complications, et cetera, et cetera. But I think that 6-week marker is really dangerous because it gets women in the headspace that I should be back in CrossFit classes at 6 weeks, which is not the case at all. If you kind of think that it took 9 months to build a baby, you should probably be thinking that it's taking 9 months of recovery on the other side. And if you're faster, phenomenal. So for myself personally, you know, we've talked about this a lot. Like I didn't have a easy pregnancy from a musculoskeletal point of view, what with my pelvic girdle pain, which I'd said throughout, I really hope it just magically improves after the delivery. And I don't know if it's a drop in my relaxin or just that my pain scale has shifted so much with that delivery experience, but it is so much better already 2 weeks postpartum. It's not perfect, but it is immensely better. So if there's any women that are struggling with that in their pregnancy right now, I was feeling really dejected and like I would never be able to walk again without pain. So that's been really positive. But anyways, where I was getting at was I'm 2 weeks in right now. I've been doing my pelvic floor exercises, probably not as frequently as I should be. And going for walks. And that's all I've done. They kind of say, like when you're discharged with physio, they say, start with 5-minute walks. And then over the course of, you know, several weeks to the full 6 weeks, build up to a 45-minute walk. I think 4 days postpartum, we did a 45-minute walk that was all hills. Like I felt fine.
Is there any reason that they recommend that, or are there any risks or anything involved?
Well, again, it's super dependent on your delivery, right? So depending on the degree of tearing that you have, right? Depending on the degree of blood loss that you had, depending on like your nutritional status and how much you're sleeping, all of those things are going to impact it. And you just don't, any sort of stress on the body is going to impact milk supply as well. It's kind of like another side to that. So you just want to make sure that you're managing your recovery and you're slowly building up and not kind of overdoing it and then really paying the price for it after. So for my walking, and again, that was the only exercise I was getting right up until the day that I went into labor. That was very easy for me to reintroduce, and I didn't have any problems reintegrating it. And so we're doing our usual walks now. And Ben says my speed has picked up immensely. It's based on his Whoop activity. But that might not be the case for everyone. Like if you lost, a significant amount of blood, then yeah, you're gonna feel walking to the end of the block maybe more than I did. So right, to each their own in that sense. So that's kind of what I've been doing. Is I've been doing a little bit of pelvic floor stuff. I have not been doing a lot of like deep core diastasis dram work, which I should be, and I've been walking. So at this point, 2 weeks postpartum, I'm now kind of ready to get back in touch with Christy, the Postpartum Method, who we had on a podcast a couple weeks ago. So I'll be reaching out to her and jumping on a program with her and I need a little bit more guidance from her on when exactly that's appropriate. Can I start her level 1 now? And just, again, is that like maybe some dram work and some pelvic floor stuff and then slowly graduate through that? So I think that I will be engaging her to kind of take me through that immediate recovery process. And only once she and like a pelvic health physio have cleared me, which usually that assessment is done at the 6-week mark. But for a million different reasons, it might take you longer than that. That's when I'll kind of go back and slowly work my way into my more traditional training modalities. Given that I had to cease training in mid-May with my pelvic girdle pain, that is going to be an ultra slow return, which is going to be ultra frustrating for me. So
even taking the pregnancy out of the the equation, it would still be really difficult to get back after that long.
Yeah, so I mean, my push present was kind of a strange one. We ended up buying a Concept 2 erg bike, which most people are like, you sure you want to get on that right now? So I haven't been on that yet, but that is kind of my plan, that hopefully I can rebuild my cardio and a little bit of like muscular endurance through my legs with that. And then it's going to be super heavy modifications, super, super easy movements, very like limited dynamic movements to jump. But I reckon like best case scenario, we're 4 weeks away from that. And it wouldn't surprise me if that timeline is extended a little bit. So it's tough to be in an ISO right now. The midwife assessed me after the night that I had given birth and said that I had like a 2.5 finger abdominal separation, which is not bad. Most women can expect to have some abdominal separation. So it's not great. It's not terrible. And then the pelvic girdle pain. So those, and just making sure that pelvic floor is good and that you can actually engage your deep core again, because I think that's what surprised me so much is I didn't think my posture had gotten that bad, but I'm having a really hard time standing up straight now. And it just feels like there's nothing in my core to actually hold my back upright. And so I'm kind of just have that really bad, like hips forward, butt tucked under, slouching posture. And so that's something that I need to address before I even consider picking up a dumbbell or anything like that.
Yeah. And especially, well, I'm sure you're picking up Mattea all the time too. So just, reintegrating that into your training there, I guess.
Up and carrying her around like this, breastfeeding like this, right? I know Ben's saying his back has been lighting up as well. I was like, yeah, imagine how I feel. But I didn't realize, like, as you're growing and that belly's getting bigger and bigger, and people always talk about your posture taking a hit. I didn't notice it when I was so big. But as soon as I didn't have that belly anymore, now I'm like, oh, I can feel how disengaged I am. And I can't really figure out, even walking, I would have a really hard time standing up straight. So that's
things I guess you don't really think about. Well, I've never thought about before. Are you excited to get back to training? Are you itching to get back to it?
I am excited. I am a little bit apprehensive because I think mentally that will be a bit of a struggle for me. I think, I hold myself to a certain level, and not being in like within the ballpark of that level is going to be a big hit to my ego. So I'm kind of just like, and maybe it's a blessing in disguise that we're in lockdown right now and we're not in a gym, and I'm going to be doing my rehab and return to activity from our home gym and not kind of in a group of people where I feel pressured to be like pre-pregnancy cat. But yeah, it's going to be tricky. So I basically just like kind of mentally ripped up all of my old PRs and maxes and things like that. And which is tough because I'm so proud of them, and they kind of are tied to my identity, right? Like my friend time is a big part of who I am, like things like that. That seem stupid. But I'm kind of just tearing those up and putting them to a side, and maybe I'll revisit them in a year when I'm like ready to go for round 2. But for now, I'm, the best advice I've ever received from anyone who's been pregnant, and this was years ago, was everything you do post-pregnancy should be a PR, right? You should be celebrating all of those post-pregnancy PRs, not comparing them to your pre-pregnancy ability.
Right.
So, and I think that is a very important aspect to consider.
Do you think that relates to nutrition at all too, or just, I guess, like body composition and goals and everything in general? Do you think that does that relate?
100%. I think that just like my friend time might be a big part of my identity, so too is, I I love to track, and it brings me a lot of like pleasure and satisfaction, and I'm always really good at hitting my macro profile, and this is what my body composition looks like, this is what my scale weight is because I compete out of this weight class. Like these are all the things that make up my outward identity, and so they are important to me, but it's also important to note that like a lot has changed and focus has shifted. And so even, you know, weight wise, I weighed myself this morning and I'm within 7 kilos of my pre-pregnancy weight, which is still significantly up. Like I gained about 17 kilos, which is just over the kind of recommended amount, which we kind of expected, that because I was quite lean going into it. So we expected I'd be a little over that like 15 kilos, 30 pounds sort of mark. But my body is unrecognizable right now, right? And I know that at like 3 or 4 days postpartum, because my stomach had gone down quite a bit, and I was like, oh my gosh, like this is so gross. And it's like now 2 weeks, okay, again, it looks very different. But it's definitely like not the 6-pack that I'm used to having. And we're a long way off that. And I think that just like with all those other PRs, you know, appreciating that like what you've created and what your body had to do to make that happen, and kind of honoring that process and not rushing it. Because right now the most important thing is like not for me to have a 6-pack, it's that like my baby gets fed properly. And you know, there's a million reasons why breastfeeding might not be on the cards for some people, or why it might not work out, why they might not be able to continue. But my priority is like giving that the best possible shot for as long as possible, because you can only control what you can control. But I'd like the focus to be on that rather than, oh, I wasn't able to breastfeed as long as I wanted because I was so concerned about getting back to my pre-pregnancy physique.
Right. And just like you're talking about training and being an ISO probably also helps in this area too, right? You don't need to be at the gym or, you know, in large groups or with a lot of people in general, and kind of be self-conscious there.
Yeah. So I think take the good that comes from ISO, because it's
a
lot of like not so great things that we can pick apart from it. But in that sense, yeah, it is kind of nice, right? And I think also too, you know, something that maybe I'm neglecting to mention is like, okay, I only have experience with the first 2 weeks. I don't know what's to come, but like maybe it gets more and more and more and more. But like the first couple of weeks with like your new baby is amazing and magical, and this fantastic opportunity to bond. And I don't want my attention to be on my macros and not experiencing that, right? So that doesn't mean that I need to have like piss poor nutrition, right? It's just, let's not let the focus be taken away and put on that.
Right. And almost right now, it sounds like the focus should be on the quality of what you're eating rather than the quantity, which it should always be on the quality as well. But oftentimes that comes a lot more naturally, and we focus a lot more on the quantity. I find for myself anyways, that's what I need to put more focus on. But I think switching that shift to, okay, I'm eating good, nutritious food, right? Rather than how many grams of carbs did I have today? I think is really important. Yeah.
And more, it's funny because like you said, normally like the quality is not an issue, it's the quantity. Whereas right now I feel like it's the exact opposite for me. And typically I'd be the same as you. Right?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Well, you're lucky to have Ben there to do all the meal prepping for you too.
Oh my gosh, I'm so lucky.
Has he been able to get back? Has he been able to get back to training?
Sorry?
Has he been able to get back to training?
Yeah, so Ben's maintained really, really well throughout this, and it looks different, but having the bike erg arrive definitely, like the day that I gave birth, definitely helped as well, because even, you know, his attitude right now is like kind of that street parking more than nothing, right? And so even if he just gets out and does a 20-minute burner and gets out there with the dumbbells and the bike or whatever, you know, that's better than not doing anything at all. And in doing that, you maintain motivation, right? It's a lot easier to maintain your strength and fitness. It's harder to build, but like we can maintain quite well. So I think that, you know, that he's getting out and doing those. And I mean, he's like, last night we ended up spending like about 6 hours trying to work out government forms and stuff for Mattea, which is just a little bit complicated for us because of my visa status. So it was an unexpected 6 hours, and he was supposed to go and train at 3:30, and that didn't happen. And so it ended up, it was like 6:30, it's freezing cold, it's pitch black, footy's on. So he's just like, whatever. He's like, I'll just sit on the bike arc for an hour while I watch footy, and sits on there and gets good and sweaty and gets a little bit of a workout in. So I think that that's so important, to have that attitude that like anything we do is going to benefit us. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So
I think that's a general theme too for people who are either just really busy or, in isolation. It's a really important mindset to have, for sure.
Yeah. And I think it's like, for him, it's leading by example too. Right. So I think it's been really, really good. And I know he's excited for me to get back to training because he wants his little rabbit to chase back. I was like, well, that's not going to be the case for a while, but at least I'll be there with you.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. And Mattea's good and happy and healthy?
Yeah, she's so good. She's living the dream, right? She just basically sleeps and feeds and on her schedule, and has everyone wrapped around her fingers. So it's good. Aww. It's crazy though. Like 2 weeks, she changes every day. She looks like a different person every day, and she's so long, and she's starting to, so when she was born, because she was like 3.13 kilos or like 6.9 pounds. So pretty little. And she was short too, like surprisingly short. And so she was in like 4-0 clothing, like could almost fit into preemie, like large preemie clothing. And now, like, I think we've outgrown our first few outfits. And I was saying, I'm like, I don't know if she's just like, she's starting to stretch out now because she realizes she's not all cramped up in the womb, and so she's moving her limbs a lot, or if I've just put the clothes through the dryer a few times, or if she's actually like had a huge grow. But I went to put something on her the other day. I was like, oh, we're done with this one.
Yeah, it's whenever I go to buy baby clothes, I'm just like, well, how is this going to still fit them when I give it to them, or how quickly are they going to grow out of it?
It's funny because I always buy like 3 to 6 month baby clothes for most babies if I'm buying stuff, because I'm like, well, if they're really big baby, like whatever, fits them earlier. And we were so lucky. Most of our clothes were either given to us, like we got a lot of hand-me-downs from friends and a lot of gifts, and I only bought a few things, generally like for a bit older. And when we gave birth, we went to go dress her in the smallest stuff we had, and it was giant on her, and we had nothing that fit her from birth. I think we had like 2 or 3 onesies that we were like going through, and the others were just hanging off her. So I was like, oh, we've got nothing for the first like month, but she's growing like a weed. So yeah. Aww. Oh, that game's changed.
Yeah, I'm surprised she hasn't interrupted us yet.
I know, me too, actually, if I'm honest.
Great. Well, yeah, I think that everyone has that there are going to be a lot of takeaways from this. And a lot of what we touched on as well is going to be in the pregnancy ebook that should be coming out soon.
Yes, that should be ready. But if you are pregnant or have recently given birth and you have questions, reach out. But I think, the general theme, as someone who has coached through this time period for quite a long time now, but now has also like lived through the first 2 weeks myself, is be gentle on yourself and just learn to adapt for the first few weeks. Don't be in a rush to get back to a super regimented way of eating. We have lots of time for that down the road. Focus on yourself, your baby, your partner. Enjoy the time, and then every week we can start adding in a little bit of complexity, right? Mm-hmm. And that's when you're ready. Some people will be ready to go back to tracking at 2 weeks. Some people 4 weeks, some people 4 months, and some people, no, I don't want to do that. I want to intuitively eat now, right? Mm-hmm. The nice thing is if you have spent some time laying the nutritional groundwork prior to becoming pregnant, you can go to an intuitive way of eating much easier and be quite confident that you're actually hitting everyone's needs, right?
Right. Mm-hmm. So. Yeah. Have you given any thought to when you think you will be going back to tracking, or is it just something you're going to kind of take day by day?
Both. So I kind of think likely within a week, like about 3-week mark, I'll probably be going back to tracking. Every day I've been a little bit more cognizant and just kind of like tallying in my head, this is where I'm at for protein, this is where I'm at for carbs, sort of thing. And now turning my focus to things like veggie intake, stuff like that. So definitely becoming a lot more aware. And a big part of it is just going to depend on what Mattea does, right? And like what her sleep is looking like. Like I said, I'm going back to being available with clients this week. So that's obviously going to be another bit of a challenge. And I think for me, that's probably the thing that will set the tone as to when I go back. I think if I was going to be off work, then probably within a week I'd be about ready to get back to it. But I think going back to work and having to manage a schedule again might just be a degree of complexity that is quite significant. And so I might delay going back to tracking and just continue to intuitively eat for another week or two longer, just so that I'm not placing unnecessary stress or pressure on myself. Mm-hmm. So we'll see. And it's things like that, you know, like we're very lucky. We've got Nana here who can come over and take her for a few hours. So it does allow me some freed up time to focus on other things. But I think keeping your stress levels somewhere that are quite reasonable for you is super important. And so things that are causing you stress are maybe something that we can put off a little bit longer.
Yeah. Right? No unnecessary stressors, for sure.
Yeah. So like you said, it's 1 p.m. here and I'm like just eating my breakfast now. So you add in like a degree of complexity with scheduling over the next week or so. It's like, yeah, okay, we might not be ready to be logging my meals when it's, you know, even for the first few days, logging her meals and her like bowel movements and pees and stuff like that was like, I'm like, oh, this is what it's like when you first start tracking your food again.
Right.
Right? It was like so overwhelming and so busy and I was always on my phone. So it took me a while to adapt to that, which I think that, you know, most new moms and new parents do. So again, it's like, okay, once we've created some proficiency there, then we can move on to the next thing.
Right. Yeah. And two, the sleep schedule as well. I'm sure if you're taking, you know, naps in the day and then up during the night, that's going to kind of shift your eating schedule too. It's almost like gotta pretend you're a shift worker in terms of your nutrition.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't been doing the daytime naps. Everyone says sleep when the baby sleeps, and she tends to sleep during the day, but it is tough to get, like, you get sucked into that, oh, but this is like, I can get the house tidied up, I can, you know, spend 6 hours doing these government forms. So yeah. It's like you get sucked into that, and my energy is pretty good. So that's fine if I'm getting 2 or 3 hour stretches at night. I'm coping quite well, but it's then she'll like throw a night in there where there are no 2 or 3 hour stretches. Right. Then that's tough.
Right. Well, it'll be interesting to check in with you in another couple of weeks and see where we're at.
Definitely. I look forward to it.
Yeah. And if anyone has any questions specific to Kat or pregnancy, postpartum in general, feel free to let us know. We'll definitely touch on it. And stay tuned for our pregnancy ebook coming out soon.
Awesome. Sounds good.
All right. Well, I'll look forward to the next time, and say hello to beautiful Mattea for us.
We will do.
Okay.
All right.
Catch you in the next one.